Okay, so this continuing, we've just been talking about Adam and Eve and their aloneness and the black hole, because they're alone in the middle of plenty. They don't have their attachment working. We've spoken about how in that story in Genesis, it's a beautiful story that describes some reality for us of how we lost God as being good, and then how we set about self-salvation ultimately. And so, Dad, we've got a God, it's not real, but we're now climbing to it in an attempt to fulfill our identity as sons and daughters of God, which is already freely given to us. It's deeply sad, isn't it? And we have this judge in us accusing us, which is somehow linked to with the authority of God, and this judge is an accuser in the image of its promoter, which was Satan, in us, and that's going. And so it's a very sad place. And we've been going through the lies. We'll just whiz through those again. I'm separated. God is holding out on me and not good. That affects me, therefore I'm not. However, I will be. If I eat the fruit, I can be God. It's happened, I've eaten the fruit. My conscience is God, or like God, all the way back. And I'm now guilty and fearful and locked by the very thing that was meant to give me salvation. So, the great sting in the tail to lock the human race. Now, Adam and Eve, as priests and priestesses of creation, are participating with Zoe, right? The flow of life. What's going to happen when the high priests and priestesses of creation change and they become blind? What's going to happen to the flow of Zoe in creation? Okay, it's a good question, isn't it? So you see, if we lose the understanding of our participation with Zoe, we miss the next part of the story. But we then operate the next part of the story from within the lie of the accuser. So Adam and Eve are walking in the garden, and God says, "Where are you?" Doesn't it say it all? Where are you? And it says they're walking in the Spirit. They're walking in the cool of the evening. It says, God was walking in the cool of the evening. It literally means in the Hebrew the Spirit, the Ruach. They translate it the cool of the afternoon, but it's walking in the Spirit. And as they walk in the Spirit, Father, Son and Spirit say, "Where are you, Adam? Adam, where are you?" And you know that song by Don Francisco? Haunting song, "Adam, where are you?" And it says it all. So, we curse ourselves. And God speaks to Adam and to Eve and the serpent. And God says, look, to the woman, you're going to have trouble having kids. Is that a curse or a description? You've blocked the flow of life in yourself. You're going to have trouble bringing forth the next life. This is not a curse by God. It's God saying, look at what you've done. You're going to have trouble having children. You're going to have trouble bringing forth life. It's not God picking on the woman. It's God describing what our actions have done. Okay, Adam, instead of you standing there and things just growing and flourishing and you speaking and plants growing and you being able to pick things up, by the sweat of your brow, you've stuffed up the flow of life and Zoe coming through you for producing things. It's going to be really hard work. This is a description, not God punishing them. We've taken because we don't understand the flow of Zoe and life, what we've done is we've moved this description by God into being a judge. Crazy. What's going to happen? What's going to happen when the emergence of Christ in us and we're aware of it? What does it say in Romans 8? Creation's groaning, waiting for the revealing of the sons and daughters of God. That then is the flow. We will see creation come into a new form. Groaning, creaking, revealing. So creation longs for this rectification, the emergence and the flow of Zoe. And we long for when creation is liberated and earth brings forth its life and reproduction flows easily and our bodies are healed. Ouch. Was this Dad spanking us? Nah. This Dad's saying, look what you've done. So I find that so hopeful, because as we understand who Jesus is in us, and as we participate with Jesus in us, what is going to happen to the world? Basically, it says in Genesis, we don't need herbicides. Pretty blunt. Probably won't need pesticides. And other people are trying to have humanicides, but that's another topic. Okay, now, the sin enters through Adam, yet Eve ate. Now, we've covered this already, but I wanted the references. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin. Who ate the fruit first? Eve. It doesn't say that. It says sin entered the world through one man. So sin preceded the eating of the fruit. Sin, in that terms, is the aloneness of Adam and the deep black hole of Adam. This is our incompleteness, which people want to reduce to actions. The work of Jesus in coming to our flesh, the work of Jesus in plummeting into our flesh, overcoming our man-made religion, our darkness, isn't about the actions, it's about the fundamental nature of who we are. Sin entered the world through one man, whatever they mean by one man, but it was before the eating of the fruit. So it's the aloneness and the deep black hole and pain and the turning away and the loss of the goodness of God. That's our sin. And then, Paul says in Timothy, Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Pretty blunt. Now, in the Jewish Midrash, it's very clear that Adam was complicit. It's really...
How does that fit with Adam was not deceived?
He knew what he was doing. Adam was complicit with Satan.
So Eve becomes deceived through conversation
With Satan.
However,
Correct.
Adam was not deceived, he already knew what he was doing.
Adam was complicit with Satan. Satan was complicit with Adam. A woman was being worked on and she became deceived.
So Eve had to be tricked with Adam.
She had to be tricked. Adam was the naughty boy. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? You look at it. And now, how's our time going there, Michael? How many minutes in?
You're only about 7 in. So.
Great, that's all right. Now, this is where it becomes interesting. We've been looking at the flesh, and what we're going to do is, just before we do that, we're just going to just leave it there. We've got this little thing here. We've got an accuser in us. What are you going to do when the accuser starts accusing you of coping with and without yourself? First thing we do is, as we accuse ourselves, we partition ourselves. Has anybody ever tried to push away parts of them that they don't like? Just keep that a little bit out the way.
They don't stay squashed down.
They don't stay squashed down, yeah. I think that's good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, they don't stay squashed down. So follow that thought. They don't stay squashed down. So what have we got to do? Yeah, we've got to drown them out. So it gets very difficult, but we have to start building walls in ourselves and defences in ourselves where we lock off the parts of ourselves from ourselves, right? Yep. part of you doesn't like this idea and part of you will love it. So, you've got your deep pain. How much can you cope with your deep pain? If I can wall that if I'm doing okay. I've got my good me, my so-called okay me, the good or okay, and I've got my bad me, and I can't cope with my bad me, so I've got to wall that off, and I've got my pain down below, and my conscience is accusing me, and I've got to keep this facade going, and I keep it going, and I've got to shut down the bad me, and I've got to suppress my pain. How much open relating, naked, face-to-face, emotional inclusion, sharing of the Father, Son and Spirit am I capable of when I'm like that?
All your effort and energy is going to...
Right, and I was speaking with a friend of mine who's been going through an inner healing process, and he said, Bruce, I've been working with this counsellor, and he said, I can now make love to my wife and be full on in her face. I can now be there. It's just with his wife. What about Father, Son and Spirit? When you look at our prayer life and our internal being and our walk with Dad, how much of this is operating in our games with Father, Son and Spirit?
Bruce, I hate to criticise your diagram, but my experience is that before I came in here, you came across the...
Keep going in.
I hate to say anything bad about your diagram, but my experience before I came into the kind of gospel that we're talking about today,
Yeah.
where God did it and we didn't have to do it, is
Yeah.
that I didn't have a lot of static wall. I had to keep rededicating myself to my rededicated life. Right? And so there was a sense in which Robert Frost says beautifully, something there is that does not like a wall.
So was this sort of a circular rededicator like that? Climbing up, rededicate, climbing up, rededicate?
Well, the wall's falling over all the time, so you've got to keep rebuilding.
The wall's not good enough.
Yeah, something there is that does not like a wall. Right? It
That's
keeps
it.
falling over, and so the rededicator has come with new rocks into the wall.
Yep.
And so there's an active thing. I'm saying it's not a simple static thing where you can build it and be good.
Oh, no, it's not.
And live with it. You've got to rededicate the whole thing.
Oh, no. The point Ian's making is this is not stable. There's nothing stable about this. It comes and goes according to your emotional stability, fragility, and those can disappear and you can actually have mental illness. If your defences drop, you take certain drugs and you're facing all the bits you don't. Some people lose it totally. Yeah, this is not nice and stable. So Ian's point is this looks too stable and nice. Life ain't like that, correct? And that's a good criticism of what's going on. If you ever looked at mitochondria and how they form in a dynamic way, we draw them as little double wall bubbles, but they're recreating, falling apart, remodelling like in nanoseconds, the whole flipping time. They're dynamic, and our internal structures here are thoroughly dynamic. That's always running. The sense of separation goes up and down. Sense of separation can be separate and worse. The fear from that can be up and down. The I am not coming out of the black hole can be up and down. It's really not a great stable system. If it was stable, it would be very predictable. And we're not.
It takes a lot of energy.
It's a great line, Trish. Takes a lot of energy to keep it going. You can be patting stuff down all over the place. And some people become very good at hard walling. Right? And as you meet in higher levels of some institutions, you'll meet some very people capable of being thoroughly split, hard-walled going. Now, having said that, this thing is the beginning of the flesh. Sin entered the world through one man. It wasn't the eating of the tree. It was our internal structures and not being able to be children of God. Remember, the calling is that we are to be called daughters of Father, Son and Spirit, and we are to be caught up into their love. Something's gone wrong with that. That's the work of Jesus in sorting it out. And it's not your mere actions, the black things you've done out of your flesh. It's your actual flesh. It's your actual, foundations. And with that, it's your formation of a religion, which is that second little circle there. So this is not... Now, the scripture says that really clearly. It says that sins, which people go on about, are the fruits of the flesh. And Paul says, now, the works of the flesh are evident. Galatians 5:19. You'd say adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, going on. All these are, inverted commas, sins, right? According to the law, but they are a fruit of... They're a fruit of our darkness. Well, we don't know we're children of God. We don't know we're loved. We don't know love. We know life. We're part of the flow of life, even if we can't recognise it. And we're walking it in darkness, and darkness is where you don't know you're loved. And then out of that, with all your pain and your machinations, you combine this with the capacity for aloneness, where you've now got pain going on. You can be alone, but your conscience is accusing you. Now it can accuse others. Well, if your conscience accuses others, I can have a wall there, and I can decide that all of you need to be actually eliminated. And I can feel nothing. You may, it's just terrible what we can do. So if sins are a fruit of the flesh, what's the point in repetitively confessing your sins if you don't get to the root of the problem? How many here were trained to confess their sins? Did it really help? Not yet. It makes you feel a little bit better because it takes the pressure off the accuser. That's about all it did for me.
What it means is there's another sin somewhere you haven't found. Just repeat it for the camera.
Yeah, for the camera, he said, yeah, but it means there's another sin that you haven't found. There's always one more, isn't there? And you may not have done your confession properly either.
The Lutherans have some kind of arrangement where you can confess the sins that you're not sort of aware of what they are. They cover that base.
Yeah.
Very thoughtful of them.
Okay, so let's look at Romans. For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, or circumcised in the flesh outwardly, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and his heart has been circumcised. Ah. You mean God's done something in here to remove our hardness? Okay. Romans 8. And this is one of my favourite verses. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. You throw law on this thing, it doesn't work. Throw law on this thing, it can't work. So you say, you mustn't, got to, you just drive the conscience. And once you drive the conscience, then things are going to get worse. Romans 7 tells you that if you preach sin, things get worse. Romans 7 says it very clearly. If you end up strengthening the conscience and things get worse. Romans 7 lays that out. What the law could do, and there's nothing wrong with the law, what the law could not do, and it was weak through this, God did by sending his own Son. Jesus came in the likeness of sinful flesh. He came as us, as we've discussed in that last section, on account of our sin, to condemn this flesh business. That The righteous requirements of the law, and that's not moral, the righteous requirements that you can receive love and give love, that you can receive, might be fulfilled. How beautiful is that? So you put the work of Christ against the work of our flesh, and you realise it's not about what you call sin. The fruit of the flesh, the fruit of the conscience. I start splitting myself. I will be, I am not. And then we've talked about this, which is I start putting defences up. I start putting defences up. Now, what's the conscience going to do? By focusing on sins, right, I'm going to become a hypocrite. Because you end up splitting yourself out of pain, and while you're accusing yourself, you still need to have life. And Zoe is still operating, except now that life will be operating in darkness. So I learnt when I was a young kid in the little religious institution I was, when people were banging on about sins, and they do, some preachers bang on about sins, I'd listen to the first 2 or 3 sins they laid out. Why? Because it described their lives. Because the things that they're talking about are the things they're feeling guilty over, the things they're tormented over. You with me? So the moment you're conscience-driven, you are a hypocrite. So we are all hypocrites. Every single one of us are hypocrites. You can't accuse anybody else without being a hypocrite. And yet we're so good at it. We can somehow accuse other people and not see ourselves. Well, you may not be like that, but I have discovered, because I've got a saviour called a wife who can point it out for me, that I'm very good at it. Sorry? She says, don't drag me into it.
So where are you sleeping tonight, Bruce?
Yeah, where I usually sleep. With a dog. Joke. Oh, dear me. But no, so our flesh is rampant, and the moment we're getting accused and we're walled off, we will find that we're doing behaviours similar to what we accuse other people of doing, and that we're trying to climb up these imaginary steps to the self-created mythology. And I've said many times, I had this guy come from a Penty church, and he said, Bruce, he says, the hamster's dead, but the wheel's still turning. You know, and he's just going round and round, it's getting nowhere. And it's a treadmill to nowhere, and it goes on. But it doesn't stop there, because after a while, in human history, what can't you cope with? And so what you do is you sear your conscience. You just get rid of it. You manage to shut that thing down and just do what you want. And then you move to that. You shut it down, and what you'll do is that you will either hurt people, or if you don't hurt people and you just decide you don't want the conscience, you'll leave religion. And if you leave religion, you might be, without hurting people, you might be in a position to get ears. So some people shut this down and they will just go and hurt anybody. Others will shut it down because they can't cope with the pain and they can't cope with the climbing, and then they throw the whole concept of God and religion away. But if they understand some sense of life, and they don't want to hurt others, they're on the path to getting ears. We've met a good number of people that way. They've given up on the institution. They've given up on the stepwise logistical salvation. They've thrown it all away. They've called themselves atheists, but they've suddenly got ears to hear. And when you meet these people, you say, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. And they do. And you say, well, I'm really glad you're an atheist, because that's not God. So then, it doesn't stop there. What we can do, we can turn our conscience on others. And in turning our conscience on others, if I have my defences right, if you're outside my good-bad zone, I can kill you. Now, this process is the foundation, I believe, of the massive deaths, hundreds of millions, in communism, where they had a process where what they did was, you're part of the party, they had a very strong accusing process going on, and you had your line, and if you weren't in there, you were othered, and once you were othered, you were just dead meat. So this morality process of what's going on doesn't have to be God's morality here. We can stick whatever we want in there. A modern example of that is the woke movement. They've got their own sense of morality, and as they do that, if you cross that, they'll other you, cancel you, wipe you out, and basically kill you if they could, without a skerrick of thought. It's the same process that had occurred in the 20th century with communism. It's what we do in religion to ourselves and other people, and it's what we're seeing in social media and others in woke. It's that they have a moral basis, and they're so moral about where they are, whatever their legal framework is, but they're so righteous about where they are, and they're happy to other and kill and exclude people. So this thing is a strong part of our flesh. And isn't it ironic that when you get involved in the institution, what do they stick into every orifice of your body? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They teach you morality. When I got involved with the institute, came to know Jesus as I was involved in the institution, I wasn't taught to know the flow of life. I wasn't taught to know the love of the Father, Son in me. I wasn't taught to know the holding in me. I wasn't taught how to offload my pain into their arms. I wasn't taught all those things. They're things we've learnt as we've got out of it. A long journey out. But this thing, which is our flesh, this was actually strengthened after I found Christ. And yet I look at these ways the Holy Spirit met me, and when she met me and did things, she didn't strengthen that. But I couldn't see it at the time. Now, let's ask another thing. Do you think that this thing could be the basis of religion? Okay, next question. Do you think it could be the base of the Buddhist religion? Yeah, they're watching. Basis of the Hindu religion. Yeah. So, could it be the base of the Muslim religion? Is Satan the father of this thing? Yeah. So is Satan the father of all religion? What about Christian religion? So let's just run that. Satan might be, through this process, the father of Christian religion.
Certainly started.
I'm not talking about walking with Jesus in you. I'm not talking about a community of believers. I'm talking about Christian religion and morality and judgment. Is Satan the father of this stuff? Yeah. Okay. So we have to ask ourselves, which tree are we living from and which tree are we eating? Are we eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as our fundamental, or are we living from the tree of life, which is Christ in us? Now, if you're living from the tree of life, what happens to this thing? When you're living from the tree of life, as you live from the tree of life, you're knowing life and you're aware of when there is and isn't love. The knowledge of good and evil is reframed by the Spirit as a servant for you to be aware, is there love operating or not love operating? Right? But if this comes into existence in a place where you're loveless, where you're alone and hurt and scared and God is not good, it brings death. If you know the love of the Father, this thing, which is part of creation, is a useful servant and a very shocking master when you're alone and hurt and scared. Was that clear enough? So, we've lost the eternal love story and substituted it with morality. We've lost our identity as sons and daughters of Father, Son and Spirit and replaced it with morality. We have lost union and believe we're separated and get back by morality. How are we going for time there, Michael? Great. So, we've already laboured this point that Satan in this is the father of all religion, including Christian religion. It's pretty heavy, isn't it? Now this can go a step further. The conscience can become the basis by which we have cults and we have people handing away their own internal measure of right and wrong to someone behind the pulpit or some Jim Jones. And if you've got a developed conscience and you hand that over to somebody else and they start telling you doing things, you are basically in a position of being controlled, and that's how they work. Now, this leads to terrible abuse, and that shift where the conscience is externalised outside of them to somebody else or something else is also the foundation for the occult. For the occult, they're externalising their conscience and something or someone else will direct that. Well, you can do that within a cult and it has the same structure. Your conscience is not meant to be externalised, it's meant to be in you. Your conscience is meant to be operating as a servant to life and as a servant to love, and in that place no one will teach you to know the Lord, for you shall all know me from the least to the greatest. And clause 2 of the New Covenant says you never hand that away to anybody else or someone else. Is that clear? And that goes on a lot. Now, that leads to, for people coming back from that, they're separated from God, they've got to get in. Their conscience is their guide. They've handed their conscience to an external person or structure that's now God, and that thing's now abusing them and they're powerless. When that thing becomes abusing them and that's an outside person and you've linked it to God, you're in a totally vulnerable, powerless place. Do you see how glorious the new covenant that God's given us is? No one shall teach his neighbour to know the Lord. You're all driven from the inside, not the outside. Now, Jesus got stuck into conscience-based religion. He says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Beware of the hypocrites. He said to the religious, "Hear of your father, the devil." Who put this in the human race? The devil. You have your father, the devil, and he's a murderer. He doesn't stand in the truth. When he speaks a lie, he does it on his own basis. You're the same. Now, we entered this as a human race, and we've gone through this process, and men are lost, and the human race is lost. And it goes on about Genesis 4. It says, men began to call on the name of the Lord. Now, it doesn't sound like much when you read it in Genesis, but it's so fundamentally wrong. We're called to be sons and daughters of God and know Christ and Father, Son and Spirit on the inside. But now, as a cohort, we are thoroughly isolated, thoroughly blind in the flesh, and thoroughly lost. We're calling to an external God as a cohort. How staggeringly lost. The darkness is just running. And with that darkness, we can now hurt each other. And it gets so bad, God's really sorry they've made man. Cain's rising up against Abel and kills him, and the earth is filled with violence. And we have fulfilled the flow of life. The flow of life coming through us is now operating through the darkness of the flesh and religion, and we're happy to kill each other.
God is on our side, Allah is on our side.
Yep.
We're doing the work of the Lord.
Just for the tape, God is on our side, Allah is on our side. Well, they're doing the work of God in killing people.
Yes.
Yes, a holy war.
Oh, any holy war. Oh, First World War, Second World War. God will be on our side and God will give us the victory.
Right, so in the Garden of Eden there were 2 trees. We've spoken about that. We've laid them out at a personal and a community level. Now we understand it slightly more deeply. Which tree are we eating from? Are we eating from the tree of life, which is walking with a relationship with a beings in us, or are we living from our conscience? You know, Jiminy Cricket and Santa Claus, follow your conscience. Are you with me? Did you realise that the foundation of Freemason, one of the foundations is follow your conscience? Conscience-based structures. It fits with the process and what's behind it. Did you realise that walking as a believer is not walking in Greek philosophy with separation, and it's not walking with conscience-based structures from Satan? Walking as a believer in Jesus is walking with a relationship in you. And 2 Corinthians 13 verse 4, test yourself and try yourself whether you're in the faith, whether you're walking in the faith. Is not Jesus Christ in you? Where do we walk from? Do we walk from a conscience base? The tree of knowledge of good and evil, that alone? If that tree is working, you don't walk from it. It's a servant. It's a servant measuring life, love and relationship. Helps you sniff that way.